Thanks very much, Peter. And thank you, Lena, for that presentation, too. There's a lot we can learn, I think, from the campaign, especially on intellectual property, which also factors into the CETA negotiation. But just very briefly on who I am, I work with the Council of Canadians. I'm the trade campaigner there. But I'm also, I guess, kind of one of the coordinators for the Trade Justice Network, which kind of like that slide that Lena showed around all the groups coming together on the EU India deal. It's a loose grouping of networks. There's either 60 of us or 25 of us, I think, depending on what we're asking them to do. And we've also been working very closely at the network with Hemispheric, and so Pierre-Yves is here from representing the Quebec network. And so in the interest of cooperation, I think I would like to speak for 10 minutes. Maybe you can have 5 afterwards. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So I'm going to try and be very brief. 7 minutes worth of really what we see as CETA, some of the major problems we have as civil society groups in CETA, and then followed finally by maybe some of the investment, some of the campaign issues perhaps we could work on in Europe and in Canada on investment. So I guess CETA has been referred to already today, I think, as the MAI, the rebirth of the MAI, Multilateral Agreement on Investment. You could also call it the Free Trade Area of the Atlantic, or the FTAA version 2, is something I like to call it. And that's because I think Europe is not really so much interested in Canada as it is in NAFTA, as in the North American market. Try searching the EU DG Trade website for Canada, and you hardly see any hits. You don't get the kind of massive public media work that our government does on CETA as this important plank of its economic policy. You don't really see that in Europe. You see a lot of talk about the importance of a US free trade deal. So that gives you a sense of Canada, how we're kind of coming into this as the demandeur, as they say. We asked for the agreement, and so we're going to be asked to make quite a few concessions at the end of the day. And I think that's why we've seen so many labor, environmental, and other groups in Canada come together to fight this. And I would venture even to say that it is probably the most important trade agreement that groups in Canada are working on at the moment. There is a lot of north-south work, for example, on Colombia and Honduras free trade deals, absolutely. But you've seen a lot of groups coming together, the Canadian Labour Congress and the Canadian Union of Public Employees in particular, which are the largest unions in Canada, coming out very unambiguously against the CETA agreement. And there's numerous reasons for that. One of them would be procurement at the local level, for example, which Canada hasn't had to deal with or commit in a trade agreement before. The kind of bans on local procurement or sustainable, ethical kind of procurement that we'd be worried about. There's expanded services coverage they're hoping to do. Obviously, they say this with every trade deal. They want to go beyond the WTO and beyond, in the EU's case, probably they want to look beyond the EU-Korea deal, or to use that as a template or the bottom line, which they can push further. Expansive intellectual property requests. Really, it's the EU has made, the whole chapter is just a request of the EU of Canada. Canada's being asked to, again, make the patent term extensions, data protection, whatnot. And there's a major fight back on that in Canada. And perhaps a new model investor-state dispute process, which won't look exactly like NAFTA or perhaps exactly like the German BIT model, but perhaps be something in between. We don't know because, as Mark said, we just haven't seen it. So in terms of campaigns, we have been successful, I think, in some areas. During the last negotiating round, which happened a couple weeks ago in Ottawa, which was the 9th round. I mean, they're 9 rounds into this thing, and they want to have a deal signed by March. So this kind of gives you a sense of where we do have to work, again, as Mark said, in the next few months is where we kind of we run out of options following that point, because it would be very difficult to make any changes to this trade deal once it's signed, I think, in Canada. But we, for example, we put a Trojan horse up to the gates of Parliament Hill during that negotiating round, a 14-foot tall wooden Trojan horse, to kind of symbolize that this isn't really about trade anymore. This is about economic governance. This is about really restricting what both jurisdictions, what the EU and Canada can do in terms of public policy. On the investment side, I mean, Canada is a prolific signer of foreign investment protection agencies. It's its name for the BITs. And it's hard to tell exactly what their thinking is, whether it's the photo op, whether it's just something they do by, like, you hit their knee and their knee kicks out, right? It's just something that they do naturally because they've been doing it for so long. But you could venture a guess it has to do with finance. We are exporting and investing much more in Latin America and the world financially, expanding our banks and whatnot, but also extractive industries. And of course, Canada. I'm going to apologize now for Canada. I mean, I don't think these days Germany has anything on Canada in terms of what it is doing really to undermine climate measures globally, whether it's pulling out of its Kyoto commitments, trying to undermine the global climate talks, trying to undermine the EU Fuel Quality Directive successfully, I should say, by making sure that it doesn't discriminate against tar sands. And we do really have a petro-state in Canada at this moment. We're trying very hard to do whatever we can for mining and extractive firms and oil and gas, and that will include using trade agreements like the WTO to challenge progressive policies in the EU and elsewhere. And so I apologize on behalf of our government for that. So that's where they're coming from in terms of investment strategy. Recent experiences we've had, and Gus had some up on the board there, but just briefly, Canada does have a negative experience with the investor-state dispute process, even under NAFTA, even under this model, which is supposed to be better than the German one. We have a quarry right outside where I live that was cancelled basically because of the impact on water and the environment, and the community rejected it. And the company now, as a US investor, is going to be challenging the Canadian government for $275 million. There was also Dow AgroSciences, it's a pesticide maker, challenged the Quebec government for its ban on cosmetic use of pesticides. And so even though they didn't win, the province was required to apologize for daring to claim that pesticides might affect the health of children. So we do have some very recent examples about how increasingly it's used to challenge regulatory measures, public health measures, environmental and resource-related measures. And I think briefly looking to Europe and how this might come into effect in the case of an investor-state agreement with Canada. I found this article, actually Scott Sinclair, who's in the room right now, told me about this article about Canadian investment in Romania. I guess one of the largest mines in the world is being planned for Romania. And here's a description of it from the Globe and Mail, Canada's leading national newspaper. The $1 billion development project would create one of the biggest new gold mines in the world. The development is so big that it will surround the village of Rosia, Montana with a sea of rubble, eradicate 4 or 5 historic churches, destroy some of the ancient Roman mining galleries that were worked in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, and force the relocation of some 2,000 residents, many of whom have already been bought out. And so, in a sense, I mean, it seems like the perfect candidate for an investment challenge in the event that perhaps public resistance does make the government change its mind and back down on the project, which is exactly the kind of situation attracting disputes in Canada, but also by Canadian firms in places like El Salvador. So I think I'm going to leave it there, just to say that I think that there is a strong chance that the Canadian, despite best efforts of some countries to kind of push it back, put it on the slow burner, I wonder if there is a chance, because of how desperately the Canadian government wants this agreement, that we will end up with this as a test case, in a sense, for the European, new European bilateral investment treaty. And whether there are examples like the Romanian case, or perhaps it's Poland, hydrofracking in Poland, where Canada has many investments, and in fact helped draft the Polish law, I understand, on fracking in the interest of its own companies, or whether it's something like our investment, Canadian investment in public water in the UK, which of course in the event of remunicipalization opens up challenges obviously from these Canadian pension funds in the case of regulatory expropriation. But anyway, I'll leave it at that, and thank you.